Hello, this is Matt Pullin, and this video is part of my Stonewall Legacy series. And today we're going to talk about the Horowitz Defense, the defense that I personally use against the Stonewall attack. Now, the Horowitz Defense is defined by knight f6 and knight c6. For instance, black plays knight f6 here, and now after bishop to d3, black plays knight c6. And there are several of the more interesting lines against the Stonewall involve knight to c6. Out of all the knight c6 defenses, I think this is the strongest one because it threatens both knight b4, attacking the white bishop, and pawn to e5. And if black is allowed to play pawn to e5 in this opening, he'll equalize almost instantly. For instance, c3 to prevent the harassment by knight to b4, and now black plays e5, and this, any way you slice it, this is equal, because black is threatening to push to e4, and if captures, then knight takes, and now the white bishop has to move again. So this just gives black a space advantage, and white has nothing to show for his first move initiative, so it's an equal game. I mean, if white really wanted to, he could discourage that advance by playing pawn to f3, but I mean, black can just develop after that. So black should not be allowed to play e5, so that leaves two possible moves, knight f3 and f4. The most Stonewall-like move, and the move that's seen most frequently, is f4. Now f3 is also pretty knight f3 is also pretty interesting. Bishop comes to b4, the knight comes to b4, attacking the bishop, which goes to e2, and now bishop f5, threatening the knight takes c2. So knight a3 is forced. And now, black needs to decide what to do about pawn to c3. He would like to be able to play c5 and bring the knight back behind the pawn, but after pawn takes pawn, and now black plays knight to c6, threatening the pawn to e5, and then white can play bishop to b5. And this is it's a very interesting attack for white. I think black may have difficulties winning back the pawn on c5. So c5 is a little too ambitious. e6 is more fundamental, but after c3, knight to c6, white can again play bishop to b5, pinning this knight, threatening to give black doubled pawns, and possibly bringing the knight into e5 to put more pressure onto the pinned knight on c6. So this also, I think white can expect an advantage from this, although it is interesting because black can double white's pawns on a3 if he chooses. I think that the safest move in this position is c6. After c3, black brings the knight back to a6. And it is possible for a white to give black doubled pawns, and then, fork black's pawns, but black can defend. So this I think white does have some initiative, but black should be able to equalize there too, because he has an active bishop on f5 compared to white's bishop on c1. So knight f3 is an interesting try, but real Stonewall players will play f4 and learn how to play this position. So after knight to b4, this is the idea of the Horowitz defense. Trade off the bishop on d3, because if the bishop moves, then bishop to f5 attacks c2 with initiative. So let's look at a game that I played with the black pieces, then we'll look at a Grandmaster game from the black pieces. So let's go to this. Alright, this is my game in the first round of a Third Coast Challenge, and I played knight to b4, and then my opponent played knight to f3, and I played bishop to g4. I now know that it's a better idea for black to keep the bishop in and play e6, locking the bishop inside, followed by a quick c5. But at the time I thought bishop g4 made sense, so castles, I traded, and now I played c6. Again, this is the wrong idea. I should be playing for pawn to c5 to try to attack the white structure. and then knight d2, e6, h3, and now I saw that I might get into trouble if I retreat this bishop, because then white can play pawn to g4 and knight to e5. And I was kind of uncomfortable about this situation, because if I ever try to give the bishop more room by playing h6, then he can just take on g6 and shatter my pawn structure. So in this position I decided to take on f3. And I think I played queen b6 then. And in this position I should have played pawn to c5, and then my position would have been decent. But still, I would recommend keeping the bishop inside the pawn chain and playing e6. For instance, this game, Rubinstein-Reddy from 1908, Akiba Rubinstein had white, and it was a Horowitz defense. Reddy played knight b4 and took immediately on d3. Some more moves were played. And now white sunk a knight into e5, threatening a knight to c6, possibly to win the bishop pair. So black developed his bishop, and now white began the rook lift, rook to f3, and now is a point where black could seriously consider playing pawn to c5, but he did not. He moved the bishop to d6. And now rook to h3, rook to e8, bishop to e1, developing the bishop towards the king side. And now I think Reddy was concerned with the possibility of bishop to h4 pinning the knight to the king, but he didn't want to play knight d7 because of queen to h5. So Reddy traded and then brought the knight to d7, and then bishop to h4 and queen c8 because the queen was attacked, and now queen to g4. And in this position Reddy resigned. So white won this game, and you may think we're a long way off from checkmate, but not really. I'll show you what should have happened. White is threatening bishop to f6. So black brings the knight to f8, its best defensive position. And now bishop to f6, and the knight goes to g6 to block the checkmate. And now queen h5. And now the knight goes back to f8 to guard h7, and then the queen comes to g5, threatening queen g7 mate, so the knight blocks there. And now white sacks his bishop. King takes, queen check, queen takes h7 check, and now the other rook comes in. And this move threatens queen takes f7 checkmate, and also queen takes g6. And black cannot guard both of those. For instance, rook e7, queen takes g6, followed by rook h8 check. So, black didn't put up a good defense in this situation. And the three pieces, queen, bishop, and rook, clustered around black's kingside, were able to checkmate because there are no pieces over there. Reddy definitely could have considered freeing his game by pawn c7 to c5 at some point. So that is the kind of play you must get in the Horowitz defense. The idea is just to play f4 and allow black to double the pawns, because the doubled pawn helps you by protecting the e4 square, so black can't drop a knight in there. And also, after in this position, some games I saw, white plays b4 with the idea of expanding on the queen side, which is kind of an unusual plan. Usually white wants to drop a knight on e5 and attack on the king side in the Stonewall. But now that white's c-file is opened, the queen side attack does make some sense. In this position, bishop takes is impossible because queen a4 check, and there's no knight to block on c6, so black loses a bishop. So black would castle, and then queen b3, protecting the pawn. So this white can also play a queenside attack in this situation. So I think that white, if he plays the Stonewall, should be willing to accept this pawn structure and develop the bishop to from d2 to e1 to h4, as Rubinstein did in this game. Well, this has been a discussion of the Horowitz defense to the Stonewall attack. We will discuss other defenses in the future.